Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Meet Me Upstream and Reverse Insulin Resistance. I am your moderator, Nicole, and I would like to start by introducing Dr. Tetlow, founder of Philadelphia Integrative Medicine. Dr. Tetlow founded PIM, as we like to call it here, Philadelphia Integrative Medicine, 12 years ago, where we offer patient care as well as train and teach others to offer integrative medicine care. PIM's vision is to empower, inspire change, create trust with patients, PIM providers and staff, the functional medical community, and ultimately the medical community at large. Dr. Tetlow maintains a patient care practice as well as a mentoring practice for clinicians transitioning in or maintaining phases of integrative and functional medical practice. Please, if you're a provider, visit our website for providers, the providers tab. And I would like to introduce Dr. Tetlow.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciate it. You can let me know if this is a good time to proceed.
Yes, you can proceed.
Thank you. So I want to welcome everyone tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us after the day that you've had today, and we welcome you warmly and delighted to be with you. We want you to feel well and energized and clear. We want you to feel supported, and that's why we do these evenings as a gift to the community. There is help, and it can be easy. We're here for you. We have a very special gift tonight. So the gift is the team, and the gift is the presentation. And we hope that you will attend the webinar, the whole webinar, and that you will receive deeply tonight. So we have a lot to give, and it is our privilege to offer. Please bring in any other family members or loved ones. Please share the recording. And we spend a lot of time preparing for these evenings, coordinating content and coordinating how we'll present to you and teach simply and clearly. And we need your help to let other people know about this free offering so that it can help to empower as many people as possible. So we want you to feel heard, and we look forward to your questions at the end of the webinar. And we get to empower people every day in our work. So we hope to see you for a free consultation in the office. And when you see one of us, you see all of us, because we collaborate every day and talk about you before our cases start, before our appointments in the morning for our provider meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to invite you to a brief, we have a ritual at the beginning of our evening webinars. We've been doing these for years, and I'm going to invite you to do what we do every day in the clinic, which is to do a brief centering meditation and finding a comfortable position and finding your feet on the floor and taking a moment to gather yourself and to arrive, to appreciate that you're giving yourself this time. And this is a time to receive. A time to be in your body and to feel your breath. This is a time to connect to yourself, to answers, to each other. We hope that you feel heartened, that you feel part of the web, the interconnectedness with others through this presentation. And we look forward to interacting with you throughout the evening. So I'll just sit for just a moment or two in silence and see if you can come in so that you can be here for yourself and with each other and with us. Thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, I'll be introducing each of the provider team members in a moment, but we'll just hear from Zoe so for some introduction, to lay some context.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tetlow. So integrative medicine, what is that all about? We are a healing-oriented medicine. We aim to address the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. We take into account all aspects of one's lifestyle, and we want our patients to develop a therapeutic relationship with us. We are informed by evidence, and we use multiple modalities for our patients. In terms of who we are and what we do, we want to deepen your healing so that way you can live your best, vibrant life. We do treat all forms of chronic illness, and we are currently telehealth, which means you can see us right where you are. Patients are eligible for insurance reimbursement, and we do offer free consultations. Linda and I would love to speak with you if you'd love to know a little bit more about us and how we might be a good mutual fit.
You'll be seeing Zoe in just a second, and you'll be hearing from Linda right now, and we'll have a chance to see each other more live. We have a poll for you.
Hi, we have a poll and it's now up. So we'd love for you to take a few minutes. Questions that we have for you is one, have you participated in a PIM webinar before? And we're also wondering, how did you hear about this webinar? Maybe you saw it in our newsletter, maybe from one of us, your PIM providers, or social media. We'd Integrative Therapeutics invitation or anything else. These are questions that help us with our marketing and how to get the word out to people. The number 3 question is, are you a patient? Are you a provider? Maybe you're both. We know we love caring for providers. And then we have some other people that may just be here to learn, and you're not patient or provider. You just found out about our talk and have come to learn tonight. So we would love just take a few minutes and answer the poll. Nicole will be giving us a little bit of time here.
I'd be happy to end the poll, Linda. Sound good?
I can't see the numbers, so I don't know for sure how we are with our voting.
We're about. Ooh.
There we go. Now we can.
Okay. We'll see the numbers now.
So how do we do, Linda?
So thanks everybody for voting. So it looks like, wow, 70% of you have been here before. So welcome back. And we've got 30% that are new, first-time folks. We're thrilled to have you. It looks like most people found out through the newsletter. Others through one of us as a provider. About 14% through Integrative Therapeutics and 22 others. So looks like we might need to work on our social media a little bit. So we've got 57% of the folks here are patients. 16 are providers and 3% are both. And then we've got 38% are new, here to learn. So that's wonderful. Really appreciate you participating in our poll. This helps us know how to get the word out. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Tetlow, and she can do some formal introductions.
Thanks so much, Linda. And I'd actually like to, I'm actually not sure if you can see me. I can see Linda. Okay, great. So thank you so much, Nicole. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce each of our provider team members who are here tonight. I'm sure you've had a day, and all of our providers work very hard in the clinic and are joining us today. And I wanted to just take a moment to say something about each of them. So Caitlin Self is our PIM integrative nutritionist. And I have got to say that she's probably gotten a spontaneous testimonial from every patient that's seen her since she's walked through the door. So we are really lucky to have Caitlin as part of the team. She hails from Baltimore and brings precision and depth And that means that that's coming into our patient care and into our provider discussion. And we're honored to have you on our team, Caitlin. I'd also like to introduce Zoe Phillips, who you'll be hearing from later in the presentation. You heard her voice earlier. Zoe is my colleague, and she is my friend. And she received her master's degree from Murphy-Deming in Virginia and brings a lot of insight to the team, brings a deep commitment to the team and to her patients. So Zoe has surpassed all of my expectations in terms of patient care. She sourced her training from Institute for Functional Medicine and the School for Applied Functional Medicine, and soon will be the only provider on the PIM team to have a double certification in functional medicine. I'd also like to take a very important moment to introduce my dear partner, my partner in the practice, Linda Sherland. Linda is an educational leader and a practice leader, as well as providing full-time patient care at PIM. Linda has heart. She has know-how, and she is a most calming and healing presence. And I have leaned on her a lot, and I really appreciate her. You will see that she holds nothing back, and you are in for a real treat tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Linda and take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Dr. Tetlow. I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, would you guys just take a few minutes, and in the Q&A, we love to know where you're from. Last time, the last webinar, we had someone as far away as Switzerland, and that's just exciting and fun for us, and we couldn't really put it in a poll. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just putting in the Q&A where you're from. I often have some of my buddies from Texas show up, and of course people locally in Pennsylvania, but it's been a lot of fun to find out where everyone's from. So just put it in the Q&A, and you know, we'll share about that a little bit later on. So this is a question I ask at the beginning of every appointment. If you happen to be a patient of mine, people kind of plan this out sometimes, but I always like to ask, what are you wanting for yourself? And that's another answer that you can put in the Q&A as well. It's always, you know, I think that's a way that we come into ourselves, that we are, can be intrinsic. So often in healthcare and in medicine and other parts of the world, you know, people are telling us what to do. And so that's very extrinsic. And so what I'm inviting you in is just to think about what you're wanting for yourself tonight as you participate in this webinar. I'm just giving you a few minutes, and then while you're doing that, I'm looking at where everybody's from. Looks like the winner for distance right now is Colorado. Got somebody from New York, a couple of people. This is kind of fun. The far end of Wayne, I love it. I love it. Chapel, Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome. Another Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, it's good to have you guys dropping in and thinking about what people are wanting: optimal health with minimal traditional medications, wanting to keep growing in my understanding of insulin resistance and make changes in my life. Borderline diabetic whose A1C is going up. I think we're going to be able to talk about how to lower that A1C. Family members with type 2 diabetes, we're going to talk a little bit about genetics. Somebody else is just open to learning anything new about nutrition and health, things that kind of apply specifically, that's great. Practical strategies in a hectic lifestyle, we're going to touch on that. I love this. Thank you so much for putting things in the chat. And if things come to you, you know, that you're wanting for yourself, own that. I think that's very important, that this is for you. And I want you to really be in touch and in tune with that. As we move to our objectives tonight, the first thing, I'd like to create a brave space. We had someone who partnered with us on some very special education, and I've always wanted to create a safe space for healing. And she talked about creating a brave space. And I think when we step into our own self-care and into the healthcare world, it takes courage to come. And so I'm hoping to create a brave space, as is our team. I think the fun part about our webinars, you're going to get to meet everyone on our team, see how we interact together. And so I hope that you can really appreciate that brave space. To understand insulin resistance and its effects on the body. Another thing I would like to tell you, that I did a previous talk and a previous webinar on insulin resistance. You can access that on our website at philly-im.com. So tonight's, we're going to really be focusing on root causes of insulin resistance and specific evidence-based testing. And so this is going to help us by looking at those root causes, know about going upstream. And so if you miss something and think, oh, I wish they would have explained more, please go check out the previous webinar for those of you who've been here, who've not been here before, and maybe missed out on the last time. And so, So I'd like to start with, what does brave space for healing look like for you? Maybe think about that. Any thoughts in the chat? You can tell, you know, I love an interactive space. I like standing in front of a room, being able to see you. And here I am. You can see me, but I can't see you. And so really thinking about sharing what my brave space look like for you. Give you just a few minutes here. You know, for me, I think about it's about having a partner in my healthcare, someone that listens to me, someone that understands and that kind of shares courage for me. And I think we'll go ahead and move on. And we might come back around to this. So this is how I really would like for us to think about things tonight. When we're thinking about how's my health, and I saw some great things in the chat about, you know, that you're curious about your own health, your own insulin resistance, prevention of disease. And so there are things we call your clinical picture. What that means is, how are you, the person? And so this is a great thing, that when we talk about partnering with the people that come to our practice, is you're going to tell your story. And so asking yourself, what's going on with me? Something that can often happen is we get disconnected. Somebody talked about, you know, their busy, stressful life in the chat. So what's really going on with you? Slowing down, thinking about the few breaths that we had right at the beginning of the talk, when Dr. Tetlow kind of had just that real brief meditation of breath, and thinking about, can you breathe? Can you settle? Can you think about what's going on with you? Because that's where a lot of the answers are, is we have them within ourselves. We know what's happening if we can listen. So what is your body reporting? You know, do you get hungry during the day? Are you having inflammation that, you know, maybe your skin's breaking out? Maybe you've noticed kind of this new belly fat. You can't quite tighten your belt well. When did this start happening? Maybe it just kind of, it feels like you just woke up one day and things had changed. Or maybe it's kind of been slowly happening and you've noticed So thinking about when those things could be changed, and then thinking about what could be driving that change. Maybe, you've moved, you've got a new job, you've left your friends. Oh yeah, that was me a year and a half ago. That was me making some really big stressful adjustments, and it definitely affected my insulin, and it affected my insulin resistance. There are all sorts of things that can be driving changes in our body. Stress is a big one. Changes in nutrition. And we'll always ask, what changed when you start talking about when you stopped feeling well, what changed? Tonight, and then the next place we go, so from that clinical picture, from your story, then we go to conventional lab testing. Most conventional labs like Quest, LabCorp, insurance is going to pay for that. And then when we think about functional and integrative medicine, we take a deeper dive into the story. And then there's specialty lab testing. We're going to tell you about some of these tonight. And then the solution. And how can I make a change that's nourishing, that deepens my health and treats that root cause? I think sometimes treats is kind of a really clinical word, but it's really that nourishing and deepening our health. So this is kind of the perspective. We're going to talk about some different root causes, but address all of these areas. So there is a lot that you're going to come to us already knowing. And then we're going to layer on some conventional testing, and then layer on maybe some specialty testing to become up with a plan, which, you may already know some things about what works well for you. You may have already tried some things and they work well. So what I'd like to talk about is this is a current perspective of cardiometabolic syndrome. And the talk really is about insulin resistance. And I don't really have a pointer that I can show you. But if you look at this graph as it goes top to bottom, you'll see body size, increased BMI, and increased central adiposity. Remember, I talked about your belt gets a little tight. And then we began to have insulin resistance and then hyperinsulinemia. So when our blood glucose is going up, our pancreas is putting out insulin so that we can absorb the glucose into the cells and utilize the insulin in the cells. But what happens if these cells cannot take in that glucose, both glucose and insulin build up in our bloodstream? And so that's when we see hyperinsulinemia, or a high insulin and high blood sugars. And as you see, look at all of the things. I think I come from San Antonio, Texas. I've seen a lot of insulin resistance, a lot of type 2 diabetes, taking care of a lot of people. And we used to really think of insulin resistance leading to type 2 diabetes. But if we really look here and look across all the things, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about everything that can happen. And the insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia can lead to elevated lipids. It can lead to high blood pressure. It can lead to uric acid buildup, which then leads to gout, and then coronary artery disease. So this really insulin resistance is at the root of our coronary heart disease. So this is the International Diabetes Federation definition of cardiometabolic syndrome. So a waist circumference in the US, men that have a waist circumference greater than 40 inches and greater than 35 for women. European, Sub-Saharan African, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, 37 to 31. You folks, you don't, and then Asian and Hispanic get even less of a break. So 35 for men and 31 for women. So that's first. The belt's gotten a little too tight. And then second, blood pressure that is greater than 130 over 85, or you're on a hypertensive medication. a fasting blood sugar of greater than 100, triglycerides of greater than 150, and a decreased HDL. HDL is what we call our good cholesterol. It's kind of the broom that sweeps the LDL back to the liver. So when we have a low HDL, so you've got to have this increased waist circumference plus 2 of the 4 factors at the bottom. And then there you have the definition of cardiometabolic syndrome. And so when we look beyond cardiometabolic syndrome, look at everything. Now remember, insulin resistance is at the root of cardiometabolic syndrome, and look at the chronic conditions. Obesity, sarcopenia, which is loss of muscle mass, high dyslipidemia, so elevated LDL, elevated triglycerides, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. So these are some of the things that we really, they're front of mind. But look at this: osteoporosis, fatty liver disease, gout, erectile dysfunction, cancer, breast, colon, polycystic ovaries, sleep apnea, cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease. They're now calling that type 3 diabetes. So look at this. So insulin resistance is at the root of all these things. So the great news is, yes, that is a whole constellation of scary things. But the great news is, by starting where we're going to start tonight and beginning to make changes, these things can be reversed and also prevented. And I think this is why I am so passionate about talking about insulin resistance. And in my clinical experience, I've seen time after time after time, people making not fancy medications. They're making changes in what they eat. They're making changes in how they move. Very, not even huge changes. And this insulin resistance begins to change. And then we're talking disease prevention. That to me is amazingly exciting. It's so exciting. So we'll talk just for a second and do a little refresher on insulin. We've got our next slide, Nicole. There we go. And remember, insulin is a hormone. It's a gene expression modulator. It has influences on glucose metabolism, fat mobilization and synthesis, protein metabolism, mitochondrial function. That's the powerhouse of the cell. Cytokine synthesis, oxidative stress, and inflammatory response. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these things. Adrenal and sex hormone metabolism. But its main fundamental activity is to maintain our normal glucose by promoting glucose uptake in skeletal muscles and suppressing glucose production in the liver. So insulin resistance is typically described as decreased sensitivity of the metabolic action, so that action of maintaining normal glucose homeostasis. So it's our insulin resistant tissues that require a lot of insulin, skeletal muscle and adipose tissue. And so we need the glucose, but these, that's why weightlifting can help create more insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle. But the problem is, remember I said if we have a lot of glucose, and we're taking in glucose and we're putting out insulin from the pancreas so that we can use our glucose. But what happens when we've got insulin sensitivity? Then the insulin begins to build up and it goes into the tissues like the heart, the brain, liver, our adrenals, the breast and ovaries, the testes. That's when we see that constellation of diseases that we were looking at on that earlier slide. We've got too much insulin and it's toxic, it's inflammatory. for our heart, for our brain, for all of these organs. It does not belong there in an overabundance. When we become insulin resistant, it's not that something's wrong with our body. Something is wrong or amiss with what we're doing. So the body knows it needs to get glucose into the cells, glucose to the mitochondria for energy. But if we keep flooding it with glucose, then we develop insulin resistance. And that's really a protective mechanism. And that's our body saying, whoa, stop, this is enough. So I think that's one thing we sometimes want to blame our bodies. Well, my body's just kind of turned on me. But I would invite us to think about, did we first turn on our bodies? Have we not been nourishing our bodies in the most kind way? So next slide, please, Nicole. This is kind of a continuum insulin resistance, and you can see what happens. We're insulin sensitive. That's where we start out. And this kind of is over a period of time. We can begin to have borderline insulin resistance. Our glucose tolerance becomes more impaired. And then we continue to move along to where the insulin resistance is not compensated. And then we finally come to insulin resistance where we can't compensate it all. And that's when we begin to get into these microvascular complications. So maybe we see neuropathy, blood vessels that are not as pliable as they used to be. So it goes along a continuum. It's not one day we're there and one day we're not. So now we're going to look at these causes of insulin resistance. So you see on the left, we've got normal insulin function. And then on the right, we move across that continuum to insulin resistance. So the things we're going to talk about are lifestyle, poor lifestyle. We'll talk about poor lifestyle in just a second. We're going to talk about toxins and environmental burdens. Mitochondrial dysfunction, microbiome imbalances. Somebody mentioned the gut, and there are things they're wanting for themselves. An altered body composition and genetic predisposition. So all of these things you can see can drive us towards insulin resistance. So we'll take the next slide, Nicole. Alrighty, so you can see kind of I stumbled over poor lifestyle. I really, lifestyle is a big thing. And when we say poor lifestyle, to me, that just kind of sounds judgy. It's like, oh my goodness, you have a poor lifestyle, Linda. It's like, oh, well, if that feels kind of impossible, I just don't have enough. It's kind of hopeless. I'm in bondage. So maybe I'm just going to keep eating that hamburger and French fries, and when we think about that lifestyle, we think about the foods we eat. Got a couple of kiddos here sitting watching the cartoons. I watch my little 4-year-old grandson, and I mean, if the TV is on, do not talk to him. It is like it draws him in. He is just mesmerized. And then what happens? He's not going outside to play. He's not interacting. And so moving and really thinking about a healthy life. And when I think about that, I think about sunshine and opportunity and abundance and hope and freedom. Because when we really go back and begin to eliminate these root causes and be in that healing, nourishing space, we have the freedom to do our life. We're not held bondage by the fact that, our heart doesn't work well, our brain is not thinking clearly. Maybe we have neuropathy in our extremities and can't move so well. We have freedom. And that's what is so exciting, to me, that when we bring this abundance and this freedom. So the prevalence of metabolic syndrome increases with cumulative life exposures. So what kind of exposure you're talking about? Did I stay too long in the sun? But these are the exposures that I think are so important. Sedentary behavior and lack of physical activity. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go become a triathlete. You know, lack of any physical activity. Get up, take a walk, increase screen time. The more time we sit in front of screens, the more prone we can be to metabolic syndrome. Fast food intake. You saw my little picture of the hamburger. Short sleep duration. Oh my goodness. How many of us are burning the candle at both ends and really having a hard time getting to bed or sitting in bed with the screens? You know, you got the phone, little Facebook, little Instagram going on there. It'll just be just a minute. And before you know it, you know, it's been an hour and you've not fallen asleep. And then your brain is all fired up and you say, okay, I'm going to turn everything off and you're wide awake. Sugar sweetened beverages. Oh my goodness. If we could change one thing, it would be to limit the sugar sweetened beverages. I think that is just, you know, I come from San Antonio, like I said, and seeing little kids, I'm talking 2-year-olds drinking Big Red is super scary. And so these are some things that we can begin to change. So I want to talk about some early clues to insulin resistance. And so if we know that previous slide, we're sitting around and we're eating our fast food and, you know, we're drinking, you know, triple, I don't know what, syrup latte. And so we know, remember I said we're going to talk about story. What's your story? So how are you moving? What are you eating? Those sorts of things. And then we move into this conventional testing where we can begin to look. And some of these things will be tested in your conventional, maybe in your primary care, but some are not. And so we tend to, even in conventional lab testing, order some things that maybe you wouldn't see in your regular physician's office. So things like a fasting insulin. We want to know your insulin will be going up before your fasting glucose goes up. Because remember, the insulin is what gets the glucose into the cells. So the pancreas continues to pump out insulin. And so it's managing until a point where it can't any longer. Hemoglobin A1C, that's your 90-day average of the fasting glucose. So normally what's looked at in conventional medicine is maybe your fasting glucose and your hemoglobin A1C, a cholesterol panel, and then another thing that maybe your primary care looks at, but often not. I know when I was in primary care, unless there was a real specific reason, we didn't look at things like a high sensitivity CRP or a sedimentation rate. Those are specific inflammatory markers. And remember, if our insulin is going up, our inflammation is going up, right? Because if it's not where it's supposed to be, it's causing inflammation. And then there are some specialty tests that we use. One, we use Cleveland Heart Labs, advanced cardiometabolic testing. We can use a Dutch hormone test. It tells us about our sex hormones, but it also tells us about our cortisol and our response to stress. Same thing with the diagnostics adrenal stress index. You know, if we're thinking about that stress, we have more need for glucose. We end up with more insulin. So this is where thinking about lowering the stress is going to improve. And this is how we can test for them. So I found this information very interesting. In 2014, 15.2 adolescents reported inactivity, minimal activity during the previous week. Girls, much more than boys. And inactivity even higher among Black and Hispanic adolescents. Again, girls more than boys. Whoops, we went too far. Go back to physical. Oh, okay. Nicole, are you on the physical activity slide? I think I missed one, but we'll finish this one. And then American adults, more than half do not meet aerobic physical activity criteria of greater than 150 minutes of moderate exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity. Women are less likely than men to move. Non-Hispanic Blacks and Hispanics are less likely than whites. So when we talk about diversity and issues in our healthcare that even go along racial and ethical lines, we can see that this really plays out. Maybe we better go back and look at what's bang for our buck. Nicole, there you go. So things that you can do, and Caitlin's going to talk about this, eating more whole food. There is not a perfect diet for everyone. Movement, we want to do it every day. We want to build muscle. Stop smoking if you are. I'm hoping that none of you are still smoking, but if you are, we want to get help with that. And then increasing resilience, lowering stress. So let's kind of skip over that physical activity and go to how are you moving? Slide, Nicole. I apologize, y'all. I got a little bit out of order here. So thinking about, and movement doesn't have to mean I go to the gym and I work out for an hour. It can be I've walked my dog around the block. And if you have a real energetic dog, you get a better walk. Thinking about how much energy do you have when you're moving. If you can barely get off of the couch because you're so stressed, you do not want to go out for a 3-mile run. You want to think about, what I can do is walk around the block. You want to think about how do you feel the next day after you move, and then begin to slowly increase that. But if you're really having a lull in your energy, that may be a time where you really want to be evaluated. That's one of those clues. That's a part of your story. No matter what I do, I just don't have any energy to move. And what's crazy, it could be something as simple as a low vitamin D. Could be sapping all your energy, but we wouldn't know that unless we tested that. Things that really build muscle, that lowers your insulin resistance, weight training, HIIT training, yoga, Pilates. It's kind of like pick what you enjoy. Pick what nourishes you. And then what's so important is social network. Who are you hanging out with? What are you doing for fun? It's kind of rough right now. In COVID, I was just talking with a young patient yesterday, he's 18, and, he doesn't get to hang out with his friends. He doesn't get to go play volleyball. There are so many limits. And so COVID has really affected what's happening with us socially. And so think about that alone could affect your insulin resistance. What makes you feel vibrant? What makes you feel alive? Are you getting to do those things? Again, if you think about, Linda, I don't have any energy for that. We want to look at that. That is a big clue that something is going on. And sometimes it might be just, what's happening in our world right now. And maybe finding some creative ways to connect. Now, moving on to our next slide, Dr. Tetlow did a great job of introducing Caitlin. We are so excited to have Caitlin join us at Philadelphia Integrative Medicine, and she is already making a big impact with patients. And so she's going to talk a little bit about nutrition and insulin resistance. And I really want you to get a flavor of what you could expect if you came in and had an appointment, came in on Zoom and had an appointment with Caitlin. So Caitlin, we'd love to hear from you now.
All right. Thank you so much, Linda. Thanks everyone for being here. So I just wanted to sort of briefly touch on what nutrition is for insulin resistance and blood sugar imbalances in general. So there are a few things here that we've listed out. Some of you may be familiar with the glycemic index and glycemic load. That's really just looking at the different ways that food is naturally balanced. And it's important to just have a little bit of an understanding of what foods are going to impact your blood sugar and promote insulin resistance, and which foods are going to sort of promote health and not lead down that path of inflammation. We also, do some education around your own behaviors and your own triggering. And then we work together. The whole goal is for me to serve you, right? I'm not here to just tell you what to do across the board. I'm here to give you some information and educate you and help sort of puzzle things out that may be showing up for you, and figure out how we can maybe smooth them out if that's something we can do. So there are a lot of different ways that we do this, but what I always like to point out is it's not just what you eat, but it's also how you're eating. When we're eating in a state of stress, or when we're eating emotionally, when we are eating standing over the sink with our toddlers running circles around our legs, these are all going to impact how your body interacts with that food. So we like to look at the whole picture. And then additionally, Nicole, if you don't mind going to the next slide there, I like to really point out that this is not about going on a diet. This has nothing to do with actually choosing a diet for specific restriction purposes. It has to do with listening to those internal signals. When we get in tune with what our bodies need, we have a much better understanding of what we can give it. So for example, we look at your hunger and your satiety. We look at how the food makes you feel and how long it satiates you. And we don't want to ignore eating to feed the body and the soul, right? I think that sometimes when we think about nutrition, we think about cutting out all the things that we love, cookies and I don't know, candy or potato chips or something like that. But I really try to function under the concept that all foods fit, and we just have to find a way to make them fit for you. Now, that's notwithstanding allergies and other things that may be causing symptoms, but I also like to acknowledge that you're still in control. Even if you react to something, that's your choice. You are making the choice every single time, not me, not someone else. It's your choice to make those food decisions. So that kind of helps you to avoid the accidental restriction, which leads to uncontrolled binging. So I see that one a lot when we think, oh, I'm not hungry in the morning, so I'm just not going to eat. And then I see a lot of uncontrolled eating later in the day, a lot of times reaching for these foods that tend to be higher on the glycemic index. And that can contribute to some of these insulin resistance issues. And then we want to look at your overall lifestyle. So Linda mentioned movement. I like to look at it as nourishing movement or depleting movement. She mentioned if you're exhausted and you're sitting on the sofa and you can't imagine moving your body, and then you force yourself to go out on a run, that might be some depleting movement for you. If you feel depleted after you exercise, that means that, maybe your adrenals and your stress response isn't where it needed to be for that type of activity. And so maybe you need more nourishing movement, walking your dog, yoga, a shorter jog or something less intense. And then the one last thing that I want to point out here is that no matter how many cookies you ate yesterday, you still need nourishment today. So we really sometimes have this tendency to think that we need to somehow make up for what we did previously, what we think perhaps was wrong in what we did. But it doesn't actually carry over into today. Today, you still need to eat. Today, you still need nutrients. And so we don't want to be punishing ourselves or kind of falling into that accidental restriction, because that tends to throw our blood sugar even more out of whack. If you recall the insulin resistance slide that Linda shared earlier. So if you're in session with me, we're going to work on wherever you are. whatever that means for you. I'm not going to come in with a preconceived plan. I'm going to find out where you are, what kinds of changes you are ready to make, and what you're interested in doing. And then we do the best we can to sort of finagle a plan that works with you and your lifestyle, so you don't feel like you have to sacrifice things in order to promote your own health. So that's all I've got for you. So Linda, if you wanted to jump back in.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It's so great to have you here again this evening. I just, we really feel very blessed and grateful to have Caitlin on our team now. So I think this I wanted to put in, change your nutrition, change your life. And Caitlin and I talked about these next couple of slides. And there's a little bit of scary news that this slide to me was really surprising. There were some different surprising things as I was getting ready for this talk. The leading cause of death and disability in the United States is suboptimal diet. Insufficient fruits, nuts, seeds, whole grains, vegetables, and seafood. That is just so profound to me, that in this country where there is, seemingly food everywhere, although, we also have many places where there are also food deserts in inner city, in places that are struck by poverty, where there is, where there are food deserts. But the healing news and the great news is that we do have the power to change what and how we eat if we want to improve our health outcomes, having colorful fruits and vegetables that are full of antioxidants, and reaching for food supplements only if you're depleted. And so that's part of some of that special testing that we can do. We can do SpectraCell, we can do NutriVal. Those are a couple of specialty tests that we can literally look at your vitamins, your minerals, amino acids to know if you're depleted. There are also some conventional tests that we can do that for that as well. One thing we like to think about on our next slide is macronutrients. And I love this plate. I think it is so beautiful. And so when we've got plates that just have all of this color and these plants, we've got great fiber. Maybe some of these vegetables have been roasted in some olive oil for some good fat. And we've got good carbohydrates. I hear people say, I'm not eating carbs. And I get very nervous about that because all of our fruits and vegetables are carbs. Now, do we want to limit maybe our processed carbohydrates, things that aren't as nourishing for us? Maybe so. And then thinking about high quality proteins. And those don't just have to be animal proteins. It's not just meat or chicken. It can be dried beans. Avocados have great source of protein. And thinking about, I love Mediterranean style eating. There's a lot of research behind that. But I think, as Caitlin said, there is no right diet. We really don't like to talk about diets. We love to talk about the food. So I think probably if you would come see any of us, even maybe not those of us that are nutritionists, you might still find yourself walking away with a recipe for some really tasty, yummy food. I always say, I believe in healthy food, but it's gotta taste great. So there are some obstacles that people believe that to healthier food choices. In our next slide, Nicole. So one thing people will say, oh, I don't know if I can eat really that healthy because it costs a lot of money. And I know Caitlin specifically knows how much different recipes cost. And so when you're working with her, and you're concerned about cost, she can even help you specifically with that. But thinking about, there's great fiber and protein in legumes and in beans that are very reasonably priced. You don't have to eat all organics. You want to know about the Environmental Working Group, Dirty Dozen, and the Clean 15. And that will help you know, do like strawberries, I want those to be organic. But then there are other fruits and vegetables that don't need to be. Wash, if you can't buy organic, wash those fruits and vegetables really well. Time, often we think, well, I just don't have enough time to cook well. Meal prep, learning about that, beginning to learn, getting an Instapot. Oh my goodness. I can cook a dozen eggs in my Instapot in 5 minutes when I'm not even worried about it. And then I may have a whole week's worth of snacks or breakfast, an air fryer. Oh my goodness. Our support staff is all over the air fryers and all the wonderful things you can make with an air fryer. I had a patient the other day that loves wings, and he makes wings in his air fryer. So there are food services, there are menus with shopping lists online. So any of these things, and that's sometimes what can happen is, remember I talked about that kind of extrinsic and systemic, that we hear, oh, we can't do this, and there's a list of reasons. But I really want to invite you to think about just how can we break down those obstacles? How can we invite in those more nourishing choices for our life? And just as Caitlin said, it's not just with the food, it's with our movement, it's with everything we do. How do we have this really rich, abundant, nourishing life? Now, remember, on one of the root causes for insulin resistance, we talked about toxins and burdens. And so I'm going to ask Zoe to speak to what can happen with the insulin resistance and with toxins. So Zoe, thank you so much.
Sure thing, Linda. So I wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit, like Linda said, about toxins. There is certainly no lie that we live in a toxic world. Chemicals and biotoxins are all around us. There's polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons in cigarette smoke, charbroiled food, smoked meats, air in the cities, and wherever fossil fuels are burned. There's BPA in personal care products, and plastics, and even in store receipts. There's toxic fumes like formaldehyde in furniture. There's organochlorine pesticides in lawn care products and agricultural solutions like Roundup. There's mold in our home, in our workplace. There's phthalates and fragrances in cosmetics, heavy metals from mercury amalgams in our teeth, poor quality supplements and certain fish. The list goes on. And unfortunately, all these toxins can contribute to insulin resistance. And toxins can be current or in the past. So how do we detect them? Okay, one of the first and easiest ways to detect toxin burden is to assess our patients clinically. Some signs of toxin burden or poor detox could include headaches, brain fog, and fatigue. Our first goal is to support our body's own detoxification. This includes regular bowel movements, which we can help our patients to establish holistically. As you can see here on the slide, this is the Bristol stool chart. And all of our patients know and have seen this Bristol stool chart before. We utilize this to help understand a little bit more about the gut and how to support motility. If we are suspecting, for example, heavy metal toxicity or mold toxicity, we can utilize lab markers, for example, like GGT, which can tell us about the overall toxin burden of the liver. We can also order and interpret specialty tests, like the mycotoxin urine test, that can tell us about the presence of mold in urine. Also, we can utilize a hair toxic elements test that tells us about the presence of heavy metals, and even a test to detect for glyphosate or Roundup in the body. But most importantly, we are trained to interpret the test results appropriately and to help our patients chelate or bind the biotoxins and remove them while we support detoxification and immunity as a whole.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Another one of the contributors to Insulin resistance is mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. It's where our energy comes from. And a dysfunction in the mitochondria can cause insulin resistance. Now, what might you see? If you were having mitochondrial dysfunction, you might have muscle weakness or exercise intolerance. You could see thyroid disease. There was a comment in our chat, I think, about the thyroid, vision or hearing changes, fatigue. Now, you're kind of thinking, well, Linda, but you said that could go with vitamin D and that could go with something else. And you're seeing that there is a lot of overlay. And so that's why we do the testing. So one of the ways that we can test for mitochondrial dysfunction is with a specialty test called organic acids test. And I know we're not diving deep into tell you exactly what every test is about tonight, but you can go to websites and read about these. And we would, if we were to see you in the office, we can talk about these more in depth. Now, we had some other questions about, are we going to talk about gut dysfunction and how this plays a role? Well, yes. Microbiome imbalance. So microbiome is the organisms that live in our gut. Can we go to the next slide, Nicole? There we go. To microbiome imbalance. So yes, oh my goodness. Well, anybody that knows me knows somehow I'm going to slip in that poop chart in there. And, Zoe did take it, but that is on me because I think how is our bowel working, our gut working? Are we having bowel movements? So you're thinking about, well, how do I know if I might have a microbiome imbalance? And so you'll have a change in your bowel habits, bloating or gas. Maybe you've had food poisoning somewhere that affects the microbiome. And so then how are we going to look at that? We might see an elevated HSCRP, which is an inflammatory marker, or other inflammatory markers elevated. We might see food sensitivity. That would maybe be more in your clinical picture, that you find things that you can't eat. What about a low B12 or a ferritin, which these are markers, are nutritional markers, but it means that we're not absorbing. Specialty tests that we can do is a diagnostic solutions GI map, or a Genova GI effects. And now I would like to turn things over to Dr. Tetlow. I told you were going to get to see every one of us and hear from all of us tonight. And so I'm really excited now to have Dr. Tetlow talk a little bit about how the genes can even be involved in insulin resistance. Dr. Tetlow?
Thank you so much, Linda. So I think it's really important to remember that our genes and what we bring and what we inherit, they're kind of like a backdrop, and they're really important to acknowledge. And sometimes genetics are so important, they really come into the foreground. And we wanted to tease this out specifically for insulin resistance and talk about how understanding and identifying can help to make the treatment plan and the instructions that you get more personal, so that you don't get a cookie cutter. Like, we do the same thing for all insulin resistant situations. We kind of want to find out why you're coming in with, and how we would care for you. And it's really different for different people. So these are some examples of how insulin resistance can come from different places, be caused by different things. So in one example here, the beta cells, those are the cells that are in the pancreas that are secreting the insulin. So that it can actually be a problem with those insulin secreting cells. And that's where you're actually going to get some of those metabolic or cardiometabolic syndromes that are involving blood pressure and lipids and diabetes and more ongoing blood sugar problems, because there's actually a problem genetically with the production of insulin in the pancreatic cells. There's other examples where you can have insulin resistance, and it's not actually having to do with the pancreas. It doesn't have to do with those beta cells. It doesn't have to do with those cells that are producing or not producing insulin. It has to do with the mechanisms that are regulating insulin, and the mechanisms that are making sure that there's a right amount at the right time, in the right way, the right place, that those mechanisms are in place. And understanding which mechanisms are off and what we're going to do about it to help you is going to make a big difference if we're going to be successful. And if we're going to meet you where you are, and you're going to come in with a certain situation and we'll understand it further so that we can really help you so you can get well and not have to come and see us and move on, be able to focus on, what is your heart song? What is your dream? What is your life's joy? We want you to be focused and thinking about and following that inner guide. And we don't want we want to create that communication with your body and give you those answers. So when you have those mechanisms that are off with regulating insulin, Linda already mentioned that there is something called type 3 diabetes. So that can be implicated in cognitive decline or cognitive dysfunction. And that actually is one of the reasons why some people get Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is actually caused by different things. And in a conventional approach, there's really no explanation, and there isn't a root cause explanation, but in a functional or integrative approach, there's actually multiple reasons why people get Alzheimer's. You can identify some of those pathways and then be able to improve them and empower you to improve them and take the steps to actually make a difference to why the insulin is off. So we also saw in that beautiful cardiometabolic circular slide with the illnesses kind of circling around the outside that breast cancer and insulin resistance are connected, and other forms of cancer. Osteoporosis is also related to insulin function. So insulin is affecting gene expression and it's affecting these tissues. It's acting on our body in very profound ways when it's in high quantities. You can think about the body as this finely tuned instrument, and a little bit goes a long way, and we're just flooding the body with insulin that has these other effects. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, you really don't have that unless you have insulin resistance. It's a core defining principle of having PCOS or polycystic ovaries, is that you have the situation of insulin resistance. So it's really helpful to understand why and how to change the situation, change the game. So next slide, please. We wanted to share how we help you. Thank you. How we help you with understanding and personalizing your program with genetics at PIM. So the first thing that we notice is that something you can tell is what are the illnesses and the patterns that run in my family. Sometimes those can have to do with just pure genetics. They're inherited. For example, cholesterol issue can be something that's familial, it's inherited. But also a family history issue can also be due to the microbiome. You can have an inherited microbiome because you were born from your mother, you were seeded, your gut was seeded in the vaginal canal if you were born vaginally and you inherited the microbiome. It's not genetics, it can actually be inheriting microbiome through that transmission. But for genetics, you might come into the office wondering how you can prevent something that you've noticed is an inherited pattern, and you'd like to know what you can do. And we love answering that question. We love hearing what those needs are in a free consultation and meeting you and helping you to feel like you have some explanation and path to help prevent. There are conventional tests that can look into certain genes. Usually they're single standalone genes you can order in a LabCorp or in a Quest test, but there are limitations to conventional testing. So sometimes you're going to get just a single SNP. It's called just a single genetic variant, and you'll get an answer for that, but you won't get a whole picture, and you won't really be getting a more full explanation. So it's limited what genes we can test. It's also kind of fragmented information. And also, depending on your insurer, if you have insurance, is it reimbursed? And sometimes you can find that out beforehand, and we encourage all of our patients to be educated about costs before they're doing their testing so that they're informed about what they're choosing. Something you can do right now is, if you're a patient in the practice and seeing Linda and Zoe or myself, is that we can do a methylation panel. And that's a wonderful opportunity to take a look at your personal situation. There's biomarkers as well as some of the gene information to see what's happening in your body, informed by your clinical picture, informed by all of the other factors that are affecting you, so that you can get some answers that are actionable, that are personal, that are also might relieve you for some fears. You might be worried. You might not come into the office because you're afraid. And we want to take that fear out. We want to replace that with information and with partnership. I also want to mention that we have an Impact Your Genetics program. That's a special type of appointment. That's an extended appointment, and that's with me. And what we do in that appointment is beforehand, we do a sequencing in a very private and confidential way, so your information is protected. We sequence your whole genome, and then we present it in a single dashboard so that you can kind of see the whole picture from the genetic background, the genetic perspective, to see based on the work that you've been doing in the practice. You know, we always want to start with the foundation. We want to start with your gut. We want to start with why you're coming in. We want to start with nutrition. We want to start with foundational lifestyle practices. So if you're a patient and you come into the Impact Your Genetics program, we can really add a whole new level of perspective and also empowerment. A perfect example is that sometimes in an Impact Your Genetics appointment, we'll discover a really pivotal gene. Two examples would be a PON1 gene. A PON1 gene, if you have that, that means that there's a number of changes in your genes. It's not just one, there's a group of genes. And you're not that good at detoxing pesticides. So that means that if you're eating non-organic vegetables or you're not eating the vegetables that are important to eat organic, you can accumulate those in your system and you can develop symptoms and nobody knows why. And you don't know why until we sort of see that underlying principle. And that means that we can help you to detoxify those and also to understand how important it is to eat carefully, thoughtfully, consciously. Another example is a gene that it's called an Fut2 gene. Some people have this gene and I happen to have an Fut2 gene. It means that I just can't maintain my microbiome unless I take great care with fiber, with probiotics, with probiotic foods, and that my body doesn't kind of maintain without ongoing input and care and attention. And now that I know that, it can help me to be healthier and my whole family to be healthier and I feel stronger. And so that's some of the ways that we can help you with using genetics to empower you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Tetlow.
You got it.
And if I just saw our time, goodness gracious, we have brought a lot tonight, and actually this is the last thing that I wanted to mention was some supplements. Someone had mentioned chromium, asking if chromium can help support insulin resistance. Yes, it can. Now, one thing we really recommend, you see some supplements and some dosages there that are recommended. Some things can come from food, especially our antioxidants. But what's really important is that you partner with a practitioner. I had someone come in yesterday that must have had 15 supplements. And I said, well, who recommended these supplements? And she said, well, I read online, and every time I see something that looked like it fit me, I just went ahead and ordered that. And so we really do have a much more methodical way. So magnesium that helps keep that bowel moving. That is really supported. Vitamin D, it's really best to test that vitamin D. Omega-3 fatty acids, this you can get from food. Walnuts, your cold water fish. Chromium, as I mentioned, is another supplement. Look at your antioxidants that all come from foods. Alpha lipoic acid, if someone has diabetic neuropathy, we can work with that. CoQ10. N-acetylcysteine is a supplement that is equivalent to metformin. And so if you're thinking about, I wonder if there is a better way or something better that I could take for my insulin resistance than metformin, come in and let's talk about that. We have another poll right quick. And I think what we're not going to do, we're not going to wait for the answers because like, oh my goodness, we're like almost out of time here. We've got a few announcements and we want time for questions. But our poll is asking, so Caitlin is a specialist in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And we're wondering, now I did a SIBO talk, it's been quite a while. Caitlin brings a whole different perspective. But would you be interested in hearing about the latest developments, particularly from a nutritional perspective in a SIBO talk in the future? So we'll just let you go ahead and answer that. And Nicole will just go ahead and leave that poll up for a few minutes. And then what I'd like to do is go ahead. I noticed some people have started putting questions in the Q&A. So if you wouldn't mind, just let's go ahead and keep putting those questions in. And Nicole, you know, once you see that everybody, or it looks like most everybody's gotten to participate in the poll. So it looks like 94% of people. Well, Caitlin, looks like you're going to be bringing us a really special SIBO talk. We're not necessarily promising that for our next talk, but we now have that on Caitlin's radar. And so she'll be bringing that to us. Thanks so much, everybody. That looks pretty exciting. So keep putting those questions in. Zoe, you want to talk about the 20-minute consults?
Absolutely. All right. So free 20-minute consults are an excellent way for us to talk with you about, number one, your concerns, and most importantly, to see if we are a good fit. We want to make sure that we are a good fit for each other, that we have the ability to address your concerns. We do see a wide range of acute and chronic illnesses, and you will want to make sure that your provider feels confident and capable to address your needs. We will also talk during free consults about our process and some potential root causes and how we might go about helping you. So this is a great resource for you. It's free. It's 20 minutes. It's a great opportunity for us to connect. And you can go onto the website, philly-im.com. Right when you pull that up, there's a blue oval, and you can click that and schedule a free consult. Linda and I would love to talk with you.
Thanks so much, Zoe. And now we have a super surprise tonight. Moving forward is we've got a coupon for 10% off any appointment. Doesn't have to be a new patient appointment, new patient or follow-up. It does need to be, you need to schedule it, not scheduled to come in and have your appointment, but just get yourself on the schedule from tomorrow through the 24th, and you'll get your 10% off. Well, what if you think, oh no, I'm a patient, I've got a package, what am I going to do? Go ahead and schedule an appointment 6 months out. You know, if you've got some appointments already set, schedule one 6 months out. And then as you work with us, we'll adjust that time, but just get an appointment on the books so you can take advantage of the 10% off. If you have a package, we couldn't use the 10% off on those appointments, but any appointment in the future. So we would love to see you take advantage of that. If you would like to use it for a nutrition appointment, or like I said, a new patient appointment, we would love to see you. Now, the next thing we have coming up is we're going to save the date. We are hoping that Caitlin is going to lead our talk, but my goodness, she just got here 2 weeks ago. And I told her it was kind of like we got this Olympic swimmer. We threw her into the deep end of the pool. We didn't even ask if she wanted to take a swim or if she had a suit on. And so we're going to wait, and Caitlin's going to have a surprise for us. So save the date. It's going to be May 18th. That's a Tuesday. We're going to switch it up, y'all. We're going to move to Tuesdays from 7:30 to 9. Dr. Tetlow, you want to take a few minutes to talk about the healthcare workers? We're getting short on time. I want to leave some time for questions.
I'm going to be real quick on this and just say for the last 71 months in a row, we've hosted a integrative and healthcare workers professionals group. This is a free group that's available to you as anyone who has a schedule of clients and patients, integrative, functional, physician, nurse, you name it. There's all kinds of modalities that join. This is via Zoom, it's international, and it's intended to be an experience of self-care, relaxation, nurturing, and being held. It's always confidential. Hope to see you there. And next slide, very quickly, just to say that we are a clinical mentoring site. We are very proud to host people on site in our clinic, which can be virtual mentoring, which means joining our virtual clinic at this time. And we do on-site mentoring when we're on site. But we also do one-on-one mentoring, which means that you can work with me for several sessions in a row. You can do a single session, or you can do a small group. And that can be a very personalized support for transitioning your own work to an integrative lens, it can be knowledge, it can be cases, and it can also be the practical transition, which is figuring out how that works in your life, how that works business-wise, how you do the whole process so that you actually have the life that you want and your type of work, it's reflecting your values. So without further ado, I think that we can make that transition we've been wanting to make, which is to more interaction with you. Linda has the whole team, Caitlin, Zoe. I think it's been a beautiful context for us to be able to meet you further now and to interact.
So I'm going to look here, just keep putting questions in, and you can always email us, and you can go to info@philly-im.com, and Denise will make sure that we get all of your questions. We'd love to interact with you. You see here, Allison, this is not exactly a question, but she said, I'd like more information that I can apply specifically around GI recommendations. She gets very generic recommendations from her GI doc. Now, I know tonight was not really a GI talk, and I just barely touched on that, but there is a webinar. If you go look on our website at previous webinars, there is a talk that I did, that I led on GI health. So look at that. There's also one on small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or think about a 20-minute consult.
There is a question I could help with, Linda. Just
Go ahead.
Real quick. I think there's a question about, does my medication interact with my supplement? And this specifically was about Plavix, which is an antiplatelet, like something that thins your blood, and NAC. That's something we help people with all the time. Is how do I do this safely? How do I take the program that I'm on now? I can make sure that when I add something that I'm not going to hurt myself, because these supplements are powerful. That's why we use them, and that's why you use them. So I just happen to know that NAC does not affect the activity of Plavix, and there's no interaction there. But we check that in an updated international database. We make sure that when we're recommending things that you're safe.
So we have another question here. Does impaired thyroid function lead to insulin resistance? And so somebody want to take that?
That's an interesting question. I think that, we think about thyroid and adrenal function. It's like the backdrop. It's like the exercise. It's like the diet. It's like the environment that you're in. Are you in a safe home situation? And if we're under chronic stressors. So your thyroid is really important for everything. It's kind of a governor of your metabolic activity. So, thyroid, just like insulin, if your thyroid's off or your insulin's off, the orchestra is not tuned. So I think that we sometimes don't put thyroid in the center of the slide as a determining factor for insulin resistance, but it's kind of like a sister. It matters, and it's central, and it's a governor, and those hormones and that gland and that source of hormones, it's going to matter. I hope that helps answer that question. I could also answer another question about intermittent fasting. So when you, often what people mean is time restricted eating. When they say intermittent fasting, that means eating in a window of time. So starting at this time, ending at this time, and having a period of bowel rest when you're sleeping. For example, eating dinner and finishing earlier, and then just drinking water until you eat your first meal the next day. That's actually called time restricted eating. That's not intermittent fasting. So time restricted eating is really important to tune the orchestra, right? So if you've got these tissues and you're trying to tune them so that you have this sensitive self-regulation, so things are at the right level, at the right amount, the right place, the right time, and you've got insulin resistance, you're doing that tuning when you do that time restricted eating. You're tuning the orchestra. You're giving yourself a chance to rest, to regenerate, and you're getting the organs a chance to reset, and they're not being blasted with these kind of, like, it's not like a rock concert where you're blowing out your eardrums with that high quantity, when these finely tuned receptors are just trying to sense and to tune. Hope that helps.
I can also add to that a little in terms of intermittent time restricted feeding. This can influence levels of leptin and ghrelin, which can regulate our hunger cues. And time restricted feeding and / intermittent fasting, it's not right for everyone, especially when we consider our adrenal function. This is why it's so key to work with a provider who's able to assess multiple areas. Time restricted feeding, if you have adrenal insufficiency, can make you feel worse. So I wanted to add that little bit as well. Perhaps you're wondering, is that right for me? Is this something that I should try to help lower my insulin? Great thought. And again, I would encourage you to partner up with a provider.
Caitlin, did you have some thoughts about that as well? I kind of saw you nodding a little bit along.
I agree with that completely. I think we've all seen that where someone thinks that intermittent fasting is going to be fantastic because it worked for their cousin or their husband. And it's not for everyone. We don't want to stress the body out further with intermittent fasting if that's not the right answer. While I'm here, there is a food question that I can answer. Someone asked about NAD and the NADH and CoQ10 and food sources because they've been having trouble sourcing that supplement. CoQ10, no one likes to hear this, but probably the best source is from liver. So if you want to go down that route, that's great. But luckily, some of the other sources actually have both of those compounds. So that's going to be your fattier fish. So thinking of your small fish, sardines, anchovies, things along those lines are going to be actually a source of both of those. So wanted to just throw that in there.
Okay, and then we've got another question. Does chromium supplementation along with insulin help cells to draw glucose into the cells? Chromium is one of the minerals that does support insulin resistance.
There's another question about what about infections, and what about susceptibility and my ability to respond to infections and how that's affected by insulin resistance. So if you've got insulin resistance, you're not actually sensitive to responding and tuning responses, and your immune system is part of that dysregulation. You're not actually responding and tuning because there's just so much insulin on board. And so that will affect your immune response. That will affect how much traffic and how much noise there is in the system, so that when an insult comes in and the immune system wants to recognize that, respond appropriately, have the right response that is time limited and it's actually ends, it's not immune activation doesn't continue. That's much more functional and effective, and it works better when you don't have insulin resistance. So your immune function is absolutely affected by that state, and you'll improve your immune function and also help to regulate your immunity so it's in a normal state, defends you appropriately, and turns off when it's not, you don't need to be defended if you have your insulin in check and sensitive.
David, you had a question about the second two.
I actually saw that, Linda. I could help with that if you'd like.
Okay, one thing I was going to say about that was that actually you're going to get a recording. You're going to get an email tomorrow that's going to have the recording and the slides. So if you want to answer that, Dr. Tetlow, I think that's great because I got a little lost track of what's where. But David, if you want to just take a look at those tomorrow, they're going to be in there as well.
Yeah, I certainly didn't mean to jump in there, Linda. I just wanted to help
okay.
in case you didn't remember the exact slide and the exact names. And you did such a beautiful job tonight. And, I just wanted to help out. Just to say that particular slide you're talking about, David O, there was a couple of tests listed, and the last two were a Dutch test and also an adrenal stress index. I ordered an adrenal stress index on a patient that both Caitlin and I are seeing today. Just to basically see if you spit into a tube 4 times a day, spaced throughout the day, what's my cortisol levels? And cortisol can really have a big effect if you're not eating regularly enough and you've got a lot of cortisol and you're using cortisol to try and get energy because you're not eating or because you have high stress levels. That's going to make a big difference to hot flashes and to inflammation and to being able to go to sleep on time and stay asleep. So we're doing an adrenal stress index, and a Dutch test is actually something that Zoe has some beautiful webinars. She is she delivered a beautiful series of talks on hormonal testing and how you can use specialty testing to really get answers to that hormonal symphony. And if you can see those in our webinar library in the events section of the website, and those are really a gift as well.
So we've got a question from Allison. How does dental health figure in insulin resistance? Dental health figures in so many areas. But one thing that we find out is, your mouth is the beginning of the tube. that goes through. And so if you're having inflammation and infection in your mouth, that can definitely affect your blood sugar because it's inflammation. So it's going to play a big role. Another question for Caitlin, maybe what kind of grains are good and beneficial for diabetes?
So again, this is, going to be personalized, but in general, if you are going to choose grains, I always recommend choosing whole grains as long as you can digestively tolerate them. I typically recommend starting with something like quinoa. Quinoa is pretty well tolerated across the board, and it's higher in protein. So you're going to get both fiber and protein. Those are two of the main things that help slow down any blood sugar dysregulation. So those are usually the best places to start. And if you are having a lot of inflammation, you may want to watch out for two other things with grains, one being gluten. We do know that gluten can contribute to inflammation a lot for a lot of different people. It is very common. So avoiding some of the gluten-containing grains or even oats, which can be contaminated with gluten, can be a piece of that puzzle. And then also thinking about things like heavy metals and glyphosate exposure. So grains are really good at absorbing the things that are in the environment. And so you may hear these sort of fear-mongering articles about arsenic and lead in grains. And so what you can do if you are concerned about that is to choose things that have lower contamination. So specifically with rice, we know that basmati rice has lower contamination than many other grains. And it is recommended that you choose organic if you have the means and access to do so, because while you won't eliminate your toxic exposure entirely, there's a good chance that you're going to be reducing it significantly. So those are the main things about grains, especially talking about that with insulin resistance.
Here's another great question about a relationship between alcohol and diabetes. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So you want to talk, Caitlin?
It's a little bit of the chicken or the egg there sometimes with that one. But the biggest thing to keep in mind there is that alcohol is essentially catabolized in the body as sugar. So I actually used to teach I teach still actually at a rehab facility where we talk about this a lot. And, there's a very strong correlation with high alcohol use leading to insulin resistance. And then when we have insulin resistance, our craving for things that contain glucose actually can increase, which sort of causes this cyclical sort of relationship with alcohol. But Linda, if you have more to add to that, please.
Well, I was just thinking about our biotoxin slide. Alcohol just went through a functional medicine course. And, they're saying alcohol is a toxin. And so when we think about what Zoe talked about, toxins, that it's toxic, it's inflammatory. And so it definitely, there are a lot of levels that this affects us. And it looks like we've got another question on ordering C-peptide for pre-diabetes evaluation.
I can talk about that a little bit. That is a great thought, Nelsa. C-peptide is certainly something that we can check to tell us a little bit more about insulin resistance, but most importantly, we love to check that fasting insulin. And that is just so reliable and so helpful for us to go upstream and to look for insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. And so this is something that we often use in integrative and functional medicine as opposed to conventional, where we might just be looking at things like a hemoglobin A1C or a fasting glucose. And while these are really helpful lab markers to check, the fasting insulin is very reliable to tell us more about insulin resistance.
So it has been my joy to lead this talk tonight and to speak with all of you. Thank you for your kind words that you've put in the question and answer. And I think Dr. Tetlow is going to take us home now.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I want to thank everyone on the PIM team. I want to thank you, Linda. I want to thank everyone who's here tonight, each of my providers. And there's a whole wonderful team. We get to see them in our 100 clinic days and work so closely together. This is a team effort to get the word out and to create an offering for the community and for you. We hope that you have received. And I'd also like to say free consults are available with Linda and with Zoe. And once you are in the practice, you can see any provider. You can work with Caitlin, work with myself, and we talk every morning about all of our patients, and we really seek what's best for you. And what we'd really like is for you to find the answers you're looking for, develop that relationship with your body, understand what's happening, and not be in that struggle with yourself, so that you can move on and no longer be in that state of distress or need, or really a high symptom state. We want to empower you, show you your role, and then have you have more joy, have you have more freedom. And that's why we have to do these webinars, is because people move on, they get better. And then we need to also ask for you to help us get the word out. So it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you've registered, please expect the slides and the recording tomorrow. And we hope to see you in the office, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.